Microaggressions are traumatic. Every time that they feel gender dysphoria, it is traumatic. So they have their own traumas that they now have to process and deal with.
Mm-hmm.
But I also look at it through the lens of the parent. I
Mm-hmm.
have lived trauma in my life. And because of that, one of my trauma responses is to want to control. And obviously, I cannot control what is going to happen to my child, and I can't control what my child needs and wants when they need to be affirmed. So, those were issues that I had to process again, even though I've done my trauma work, it came up again and I needed to readdress it again. And you said it trauma is not only surviving a war. Trauma is, and I'm going to uh, paraphrase Gabor Mate because he said trauma isn't an event, trauma is an injury. So it isn't necessarily what happens on the outside. It's not the bomb that went off. That's not what trauma is. Trauma is the injury that we had on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
And some of us get injured faster or in different ways depending on the different stimulus. So
Right.
it doesn't have to be on the nightly news.
Goodness. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Freedom Seeker Show. I'm here today with Tammy Plunkett. And before we get started, I'd just like to introduce myself real quick for those of you who are new to this broadcast. My name is Yvonne Winkler, and I'm the CEO of Lotus Consulting Inc., a company that is on a mission to support women's well-being through empowerment and harmony and collaboration. And collaboration is hands down one of my absolute favoriteest topic to talk about because this is what women do is we collaborate. We thrive when we work together. And my guest today, Tammy Plunkett, I've been collaborating with her now for a year and a half at least, and it has been such an enormous journey that we've been on together. And I am so excited to have you here today, Tammy, because not only is the topic something that I want to give airtime to, but also just the profound education I have received through you has been invaluable to me. And that is something that I would like to share with this community because I think we can all benefit from having a collaboration partner such as yourself in our corner. So welcome to this episode of the Freedom Seeker Show, and welcome to the Freedom Seeker Show, Tammy. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm good. I'm good. Actually, doing really well today. So that's
Good.
good.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a rough go in the last couple of weeks, hey, with just all the things that are happening in the ethos. And I'm so happy to have you here and on this topic specifically. So let's tell our guests, our viewers today, what we're talking about. And I've been thinking about it all morning on how to open this conversation up especially from the place I'm sitting from. Um, there is, and I found this this morning. There's a big poster at the Calgary Zoo that I've taken a picture of, and I've thought of this quote many times, and this morning inclusive. And it reads, "In the end, we will conserve only what we love. We will love only what we understand, and we will understand only what we have been taught." And I think that really sets the tone for what brought us together for this conversation today, because I know from personal experience that education is really important to you. And I also know that the topic of gender identity and gender diversity and inclusivity has been in our conversations many times, because I'm I'm new to it. I don't know. I didn't know what pronouns meant. I didn't know why it's important to have them show up on our conversations, or I didn't know how to react or be around a person where I couldn't clearly identify, or where it may not be or where it is obvious, but it isn't what how they would like to be referred to. And
Mm.
so it was such a touchy topic for me, and my reaction, my taught response has been to just avoid it, stay clear of it, back up, and not say anything at all. And I just don't want to show up that way in the world, because I want to be inclusive, and I want to be sensitive to how people feel and how people want to be related to. And that became specifically very recently obvious to me in an interaction I had um, where I called someone she, and they wanted to be referred to as they, and I didn't know that. And I came to you and I said, well, how do I respond to this now? Like, how do I work with this? And you walked me through that. And so I just always have found you such an incredible resource for guiding with compassion the people that are learning how to be in this journey, because I genuinely believe that most of us don't want to be arrogant, ignorant, or incompassionate, if that's the word,
Mm.
towards complex topics like transgender and gender diversity. So I'm going to shut up now because you're the expert in this, and I'll let you lead the way. But Tammy, tell us first, who are you?
So first, my name is Tammy Plunkett, and my pronouns are she and her. So I do introduce myself with my pronouns when I'm meeting people for the first time, and that's typically as an introduction so that people know what pronouns to use and not just assume. But it's also a signal to people in the community that I'm a safe person. So that's right out of the gate. I'm going to give you a lesson.
Love that.
So I am the mother of four children, and all four identify as queer. My third child came out as transgender 6 years ago, and that launched me on this journey. I wanted to learn everything I possibly could about what Mitchell needed from me. And then I don't even know how long after, a year or so after that, my oldest child came out as non-binary, and they use they and she pronouns. So I use they and she. I know that they prefer that I would use they, but 26-year habit is hard to break, and especially that I don't see them every day.
Right.
And they've kept their birth name, which is very feminine, so it just adds a little layer of nuance and challenge. And then this May, my youngest child came out as transgender. She had been assigned male at birth, and she is a trans girl. So I feel like I have a magical uterus, and I have walked the walk. I am back on the, I call it my roller coaster ride. I got a second admission to a new ride on the roller coaster. And so that's where my experience comes from. I'm also a certified coactive life professional coactive life coach. And so I've been life coaching for 8 years now. And before that, I was a registered nurse. So I do have some scientific background that underlies everything that I speak about. And I happen to love writing, and I'm an author, and I have been a writing coach for the last 7 years as well. So
Mhm.
I wear many hats.
You do, as most women do. Like, we do love being versatile in our gifts and our skills. And I think there is an overarching umbrella for you that is you are a tremendous advocate for giving voice to those who just either don't have one or just don't know how to express themselves in a way. And whether you give that voice through writing, or whether you give that like you taught me how to write a book, and or whether it is through the advocacy work that you do and the speaking engagements that you do, or by coaching uh,
Mm,
us through those tough emotional times. You are you're just such an incredible human being with so much compassion.
mm,
Um, and I said this to Tammy before we came on the air. It's it's what makes you so uniquely you, Tammy, is that um, your lived experiences through your children and through your own life is what makes you so good in the advocacy work that you do.
mhm,
Yeah,
mhm.
yeah, amazing. So. Um, I just pulled up questions that I actually wrote down when I was listening to your book, Beyond Pronouns, which for anyone who has ever wondered what pronouns and what gender diversity is really all about, I would say this is a really great start because the book, yes, you wrote it with parents in mind, for parents who are just learned that their child is transgender or would like to have a different identity, and I found it super helpful because I had no idea at the diversity of all the different things that um, the child, but also the parent is going through in this transition. So, um, tell us a little bit more about what motivated you to write the book, and and what you learned in the book writing process about your own experience with this.
I chose to write the book because I was looking for that book and I could not find it. And that's what I did find on the landscape were a couple of memoirs written by mostly mothers. There was one written by a father, but mostly moms of trans kids, and it was a memoir. So it was them telling their story. And then there were a couple of books that were written by psychologists, social workers, professionals. But I felt like I couldn't see myself in all of these stories. I often say that, what I've learned through this journey is to let go of the binary of black and white, on and
Mm.
off, yes and no, and to look at all of the gray areas in between. And what I would see is the parents who got everything right and they were super happy and they threw out the rainbow, they brought out their rainbow pom poms and like, yay, my kid is trans. And I didn't identify that with that immediately because I had a lot of fear and questions, and I just couldn't go there right away. Although I am there now. But and then the other option was parents who were sending their kids away to conversion therapy and kicking their kids out, and they were just these horrible narratives that I would hear, and I did not hear my story in that, which was in that area, the nuance of I love my child and I will do absolutely anything to make them happy, and I have no idea what I'm doing. And because of my nursing background, uh, being transgender was a pathology a long time ago when I was a nurse a long time ago. And so I wanted to fix it.
Mm.
And that's where I through this path, I realized this isn't something that needs to be fixed. It's something that needs to be understood.
Yes.
Um, and that was one of my biggest lessons is, and I that's what I want most people to take away when I speak. I I really appreciate that you've brought up my compassion, and what I've tried to do, because I wasn't perfect out of the gate, is to see other people that way. And so I always say I call people in instead of calling them out. I don't believe in canceling people because they got the pronoun wrong. I believe in educating people and bringing them in so that they get what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the information it comes from. And Unfortunately, some of the narrative is that there's something wrong with being transgender. And it's that whole othering, right? And so it is the next frontier of acceptance. We're learning to accept different cultures and different ethnicities and different races. And now we also need to recognize that there's diversity in gender as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the things that I've always found so frustrating for myself anyways was is the lack of knowledge that I was having on the topic and where to find more knowledge. And I mean, in the world today where we have access to knowledge at our fingertips, literally, um,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's certainly made it easier to get information, but it's also made it more overwhelming for me. And and so the overwhelm is usually causes me to shut down again. And what you have done with the book that you wrote and being the human that you are, is you've brought it in an accessible way to me that I can digest, that I can uh, immerse myself into it, even though I don't have children, and I don't have the experience of having a child who's coming to me and saying, I want to be identified with a different gender. Um, and yet it's something I'm working with on a daily basis. I have a friend who, to me, uh, came out a long time ago. And I remember when she first came out to me, I was like, oh my God, I don't know how to respond. I don't know what to say. And of course, not of course, my reaction to not knowing what to do is usually withdrawing from the
Mm-hmm.
situation. And that's, from what I learned from your book, is one of the worst things we can do for the community. So tell us, if you can, maybe a little bit more about how we can respond differently um, when when we're encountering scenarios, in everyday scenarios. So not just specifically to moms or dads or parents.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like withdrawing and shutting down and not talking to people, it can be hurtful. And if you look at it in all of our aspects of life, and it's natural, we do it. If someone tells us they have cancer, we stop calling them. If
Yeah,
someone's parent dies, we stop calling them. Oh, we don't want to bug them. We don't want to remind them that they have cancer. So we don't want to talk about it. Whereas it's so lonely as is. I mean, we are social beings. We want to be seen and heard and known, and that is
yeah,
very important for the trans community and trans children, is they want to be seen and known for their identity. And
right.
it's a bit of a double edge because they also socially isolate until they feel like they can trust that people will see and know them for who they are. But acknowledging people for who they are is so important. So using the correct name that they give you, using the pronoun that they give you, don't be afraid to ask. Ask someone, hey, what's your pronoun? Or introduce your pronoun first, and then it gives them that opening. And I think the biggest lesson, and this is not easy, but the biggest lesson is for all of us to see the human being.
Mm,
I think that when it's a T on an acronym, LGBTQIA plus, like you can just keep going with all the letters. And when you do that, it others people and it makes them different. So when we see them as a human, as a real person, and of course, I couldn't see my children as anything other than human,
right.
and that's where it you call them in and you create a place for them, and there is no shame in saying, "Hey, I'm sorry, I messed up."
Yeah,
And just move on and not make it about you and like, oh, I made a mistake and I'm new to this and they didn't have this when I was young and I'm having a bad day. When we do that, we're making it about us. So I mean, this is a great exercise in vulnerability and being our true authentic self, ourselves as much as them.
Hmm. I love this so much. And if we can go there for a second, that was something that was a huge aha for me in your book, was the topic of microaggression.
Mm,
Um, and what I didn't realize, I can totally empathize and recognize it even in my life, how it can happen, how it happens to all of us, and even more so to people who are not properly identified or included,
mm,
um, is this microaggression and how that happens. So you've taught me this as well, and you said, you might be the fifth person that day
mhm.
that didn't call them by their right name, and that's why they just like lashed out. So it's not about me, it's about just what they're going through, what their experience has been in not just that day, but up until this point. Can you talk a little bit more about the microaggressions that you've experienced your child go through?
Um, yeah, so the typical ones are misgendering, so using the wrong name and the wrong pronoun. Um, and then there's the subtle things, and that's what microaggression is. It's the micro part of it. It's a death by a thousand cuts. So it's going out in public and there not being a gender neutral washroom. So it's like, oh, do I use the male bathroom and risk being uh, assaulted for being too feminine in a men's area? Do I risk using the female bathroom and risk having the cops called because I'm presenting masculine and they don't want men in the bathroom? It can be going in to the store and having someone call you sir or ma'am, and you don't identify with either of them, you're non binary. So it's well meaning for us to say, oh, thank you, sir, you have a great day. We're just trying to be polite, but we don't realize that, you know, that compounds on top of the fact that I couldn't go to the bathroom, on top of the fact that I couldn't find clothes that fit my body because my body isn't typical, on top of the fact of, grandma keeps insisting on calling me my birth name. It's just one on top of the other. So yeah, it's a death by a thousand cuts, and it's as the parent, sometimes we're the safe person who gets the blow up. It's, I made a mistake and it's my first mistake in 3 months,
Mm-hmm.
but because of everything else they experienced that day, they blow up at me because I'm that safer person who can take it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, 100%. And yeah, that's what we do. Um, can you tell us a little bit more about, because this goes right in line with this, the things I take for granted on an everyday basis, and how that uh, it just really stopped me in my tracks when I read about those things in your book. Um, can you tell us a little bit more about dysphoria? Like, what does it mean, and how did this show up for you in the book?
Yeah, so dysphoria is one of the criteria that indicates that a child is transgender or has gender diversity. So it's not necessarily that a kid wakes up one day and they're like, I want to be a boy. They actually have symptoms, or I wouldn't even say symptoms because that's pathologizing it. They have issues that they have to deal with. And so for Mitchell, gender dysphoria showed up as he did not see a boy in the mirror, even though when he woke up in the morning, there was a boy in his head. He knew himself to be a boy in his heart, in his head, in his mind. And when he would look in the mirror, it was not a boy reflected back at him. So that's the easiest way to say what dysphoria looks like. And I'm going on what he's told me. Obviously, I'm not trans. I don't know my 100% myself, but I've had it on good authority.
Mm-hmm.
The other dysphoria that showed up for him was not wanting to shower because then he would have to touch his naked body, and he was getting secondary feminine characteristics that he did not want to touch. And so he would just avoid washing. And then around menstruation as well, he did not want to have a menstruation. So that would cause a whole lot of panic and anxiety. Um, so those are indications of this isn't just a phase, it isn't just a whim, that he actually did suffer from a lot of dysphoria around the body that was betraying him because it wasn't who he is.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's just such a big topic, and so much we can uncover in from your book, but also in conversation. And I encourage anyone who has questions about this topic to leave them here in the comments, or to send me a message, or to message Tammy, and we can always bring you back into this conversation, and maybe dive into a different topic around this. I'm definitely open to this, because I uh, I think you are. I agree with you that it lies in education. For me to understand and know more about this makes me opens me up to empathy. It opens me up to curiosity. I want to know more about it, and then I can ultimately go about, being present and aware in the world in a different way as well. To guiding it back to the pronouns, because I have had people come up to me and say, why do you have she her in your name on Zoom, for example, or whatever, like, why does that matter? And even I've heard some jokes being cracked about pronouns and so on and so forth. Can you tell us, just for everyone's purpose here, what's the importance around making it a safe space for people?
Oh, that's a deep one. um, the importance around making it a safe space for people, I would say, not to be dramatic, and anyone who knows me knows I am not a dramatic person, is it saves lives. When someone is dealing with dysphoria and they're dealing with microaggressions, it is all encompassing. It's 24 hours a day that being transgender is on their mind. And all of these times that they are not seen, and you use the wrong pronoun, it wears on people. And there is a high incidence of suicide, of self-harm, of uh, substance use and abuse. And I know that's a topic that you talk about. So this happens a lot to the gender diverse community. And the more that we can affirm them and use their pronoun and be kind and accepting and open, we're saving lives. It's as simple as that.
Hmm. I wow. I didn't know what you were going to say to this in answer, but it I don't think it is traumatic at all, because reading, like, listening to your book, and we're getting some comments here, which I'll read in a moment. Reading your book, I don't know if I was surprised, but I was certainly still very much shocked. And it's moving me into an emotion again right now. How young these children feel they need to end their life because they're not being accepted for who they feel they are,
Yeah.
and mostly out of lack of education on our part. And that's what I think I find so incredibly sad about this. So
Mm.
thank you for the work that you do, Tammy, and thank you for being so unbelievably vulnerable, because that was the other piece of it. Is like, kindness is important, and I'm always a big advocate for kindness. And um, the things that you have been through as a result of your vulnerability, on this topic specifically, um, has thankfully only made you stronger. Whereas, I perhaps some people would have given up. So I really want to shine a light on that. Like, thank you for being the human that you are. And yes, you have a magical vagina. And I think that's why the universe or God gave that to you, because you're because of your heart and your compassion on this topic. If anyone is the one to educate us and then help us make a better life for the transgender community, it you need to be part of it, and you are part of it. And so thank you for that. So some of the comments here that we've, can you see them too? I don't know how this works.
No.
Okay, so I see them. I unfortunately can't see who it is because I don't have Facebook open. But um, one of the listeners said, when I chat with kids, my kids, about their future, it's when you get married to your spouse or partner, but not defining wife or labeling, like defining wife or husband.
Mm-hmm.
And I say love is love. And then another someone else said, I can see the microaggression at my job as a paramedic all the time.
Mm.
It's important to address people the way they want. I introduce myself, then ask what would you like me to call you? That's wonderful. I'm so excited. Oh, it's Tracy. Yeah, I figured as soon as I heard paramedic, I was like, it's Tracy Scott. Thank you,
Mm.
Tracy, for commenting and participating. This is wonderful.
Can I briefly just address the love is love comment?
Absolutely.
I love that. And I love that there's not the assumption that your kids will automatically be straight, because that is an assumption we all make in society. If we, you know, if someone is, when someone is born, we look between their legs and we say it's a boy or it's a girl. And if it is a boy or a girl, we automatically assume that they're going to have certain jobs or certain tasks in the house. And the other thing that we often assume is that they will just automatically marry somebody of the opposite sex. So that is what we do when we assign a gender at birth. The one thing I want to stress, and this is one of the first things I teach people all the time, when Mitchell came out, he was 11. And a lot of people would tell me, how does an 11-year-old know? Like, isn't that too young to start talking about being transgender? And when I dug deeper, it's because they associated being transgender with being gay or lesbian. They thought it was a sexual attraction, and gender identity is very separate from our sexual attraction. And gender is actually formed between the ages of 3 and 8. It's not, and then sexual attraction usually comes around puberty. So the reason why a lot of teens come out as transgender is when their body betrays them. So Mitchell was what you would call a tomboy, and we would dress him in jeans and a t-shirt, and nobody cared, and he didn't care until his body started to betray him.
Mm-hmm.
So gender and sexuality are separate and different, and that was just the point I wanted to make.
And it's such a big one. I think this is such an important, very, like you said, it's the first thing you teach. It's such an important piece, that because I wonder how many people are right now stopping and going, whoa, I never made that distinction between the two. And of course, now that makes total sense why, um,
And you can't fault anyone, because we do LGBTQ, and the T is right there with gay, lesbian, and bi, and so we assume that it's all the same,
it's
but
all the
they're
same.
very different. Yeah.
Yeah, really, really good distinction. The other thing I wrote down, and again ties right into this microaggression topic and the dysphoria. You talk in your book about the trauma responses of um, us, like as we are going into the world, and how we're basically, by not addressing our own trauma situations, perpetuating that response onward. Um, very briefly, because we could talk a whole episode just on that. I love that you used a scale for this, because one of the comments I think you made was, I wrote it down, it doesn't have to make the nightly news in order for it to be considered trauma. Can you
Mhm.
just quickly comment on that? Because I feel like this is something that will also open up a different mindset. How does trauma affect how we're treating other people, and what did you mean when you said it was on a scale?
Um, so there's two ways to look at trauma, and I dive into both in the book. But one is that the child is going through trauma. So microaggressions are traumatic. Every time that they feel gender dysphoria, it is traumatic. So they have their own traumas that they now have to process and deal with.
Mm-hmm.
But I also look at it through the lens of the parent. I
Mm-hmm.
have lived trauma in my life. And because of that, one of my trauma responses is to want to control. And obviously, I cannot control what is going to happen to my child, and I can't control what my child needs and wants when they need to be affirmed. So, those were issues that I had to process again, even though I've done my trauma work, it came up again and I needed to readdress it again. And you said it trauma is not only surviving a war. Trauma is, and I'm going to paraphrase Gabor Mate, because he said trauma isn't an event, trauma is an injury. So it isn't necessarily what happens on the outside. It's not the bomb that went off. That's not what trauma is. Trauma is the injury that we had on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
And some of us get injured faster or in different ways depending on the different stimulus. So
Right.
it doesn't have to be on the nightly news. Whatever is traumatic, whatever the injury was for you, that will show up as your response.
Hmm. I'm I love this, and I just realized why I love this so much as a part of the education here is because I think in order for us to have the open mind to come to the table to be educated on this topic, we need to also take a look at why we have resistance to certain things. And I think trauma is one of those resistors that sits out there for many of us, and we are like, no, I'm fine, and there's absolutely nothing wrong, and I didn't experience this, that, or the other, and therefore and it's a
Sweep it
block.
under the carpet.
Exactly, there's this block and this
Yeah.
wall that we throw up, um, and and I think one way of taking that wall down is by acknowledging that trauma can look in different ways, and we all have trauma responses, and we have them because we all had trauma in some shape or form, without making them anything other than what they are to us internally. So,
Hmm.
wow.
If I
Um,
could also hop on to, you used the word resistance, and I wanted to
mhm,
address that as well. And that our society is, and human beings are set up psychologically to categorize things. And that is part. And so when we categorize things in, they are part of our group, our in group, or they're part of the out group.
mm,
So, hockey teams, politics, what university you went to, what church you go to, it becomes our little club. And feminism and the patriarchy, like we will assign ourselves groups. And when someone is from a different group, we will have resistance. And so the part of what I try to do with the work that I do is to make transgender part of the in group instead of part of the out group. And just trying to humanize them and see all of our gender diverse family they're just regular human beings and they're not
yeah,
this different thing. And I think that's where the resistance comes from, is when we other and we make things different and we make them scary.
absolutely. I can feel that to be true for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I can also see how that just opened up a whole new set of questions for me. Is how can I stop othering? And education is definitely one of the ways. Um, so that leads me to my final question for you. I know this was a short conversation on a very, very big topic, um, but what would you say is number one? What would you say is one of the biggest things we can do to be more conscious on the topic, and also how do we do that?
Um, what I would do is to look for evidence of gender diversity in your area, and get to know a trans person. One thing is, so there's the same percentage of people who are transgender that are redheads. So if you look around your work area, your city, when you're on the bus, when you're in the stores, and see how many redheads you see, that's the same number of people who are transgender. You just may not know it. You just may not see it because sometimes transgender people pass as everyday people, and they're just regular day everyday people. Uh, so uh, so yeah, get to know a trans person, and obviously, if you don't have anyone in your family or your workspace or in your area, read books about it, watch television shows about it. It's like if you buy a white Audi, then all you see are white Audis every time you go down the street. The more you look for it, the more you will see it.
You see it. Well, and the more you learn about it, the more you can see it, because now you're seeing things that I didn't realize before. Like, I honestly never gave it a second thought about the bathrooms, right? Like, I mean, to me, it was never a big issue to begin with. Having gender neutral bathrooms was never a topic for me. But um, I can, like, after reading your book, I was like, wow, of course. I mean, it makes total sense, but I cannot imagine not being able to go out into public out of concern that I won't be able to eat and drink, or, because I can't use the washroom. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's just such a reality for that community. And I didn't, and if it's as simple a solution as neutralizing bathrooms, then
Mm-hmm.
why aren't we doing that? So, um, yeah, yeah, education, education, education. We all can learn more about it. And so that also speaks to the volume increase in terms of productions that are coming out right now on TV shows.
Mm-hmm.
It's very noticeable, and it's great. So by watching them, and we are supporting also that there's an education, a continued education happening on these topics. So thank you for bringing this very important topic to our attention, Tammy, and thank you for taking the time to be here with us live today. If you have any other questions for Tammy, please put them in the comments below. Tammy is part of the Freedom Seeker community, and she'll be happy to answer them for you in the comments. You can also find Tammy on you give the website, and then I'll make sure I'll put it on the bottom of the comments as well.
Yeah. So my website is tammyplunkett.com.
Okay.
I'm on social media as at Tammy Plunkett, or on Facebook it's at Tammy Plunkett Author. I'm pretty easy to find.
Yeah, and she is, and she's been on big television stuff as well. So if you Google Tammy Plunkett, I'm sure you'll see her beautiful smile pop up in different ways. Yeah.
There is another Tammy Plunkett who's a teacher in the U.S. I feel sorry for her because I think I take up the first 3 pages of Google.
You might want to reach out to her sometime and just see how you can collaborate with her.
I owe you a book at least.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, Tammy. We really appreciate it. And until next time, have a really wonderful weekend.
Thanks for having me.